Ladies and gentlemen, Marshall Brown.
Hi, I'm Marshall Brown, and this is Water Matters. As amazing as it seems, there are still many people on Long Island who don't know where their drinking water comes from. They think it comes from upstate, or from the Hudson River, or from some other faraway place. The fact is, most of our drinking water comes from ancient underground aquifers that were formed millions of years ago. The aquifers are replenished by rain and snowmelt, but they can also be contaminated by human activity. On today's show, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Sarah Meyland, Director of the Center for Water Resources Management, New York Institute of Technology. Sarah has been a leader on groundwater issues on Long Island for many years and is here today to share her expertise and experience with us. We'll also hear an editorial from landscape architect and natural turf proponent, Edwina Van Gaal. That's all coming up here on this edition of Water Matters, so stay tuned, we'll be right back.
Live from the Grassroots Studio in beautiful downtown Port Washington, this is Water Matters, with host Marshall Brown and special guest Dr. Sarah Meyland, brought to you by the Jump In campaign and made possible in part by funding from the Long Island Community Foundation. And now, here again is your host, Marshall Brown.
Hello, everybody. Sarah, I'm so glad you could be here today. I've seen your presentation. It's really a call to action. It's not only a must-see, but a must-know, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you further. But right now, your public awaits.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about groundwater, the source of all drinking water here on Long Island. You may know that Long Island is actually a pretty unique area. It is the largest island in the continental U.S. Beneath all of Long Island are formations that store water. We call those formations aquifers. And these aquifers that are sandy contain all of the drinking water we use here on Long Island. While the water is stored in the aquifers, we call it groundwater. So where is the water? Well, it's actually in these sandy layers in between those very, very small spaces from one sand grain to another. If you dig down deep enough and expose the groundwater, you'll see that the water flows out of those spaces and you can literally see it. But mostly we don't see it that way, and so we have to rely on diagrams of where the aquifers are and how they work. So basically we have three primary aquifer formations. The topmost formation is called the glacial aquifer. The formation itself is only about 10,000 years old. And the water that it stores is only decades old. Right beneath the glacial aquifer is the main aquifer called the Magathy. That formation has been around since about 65 million years, but the water stored there is only about 800 years old at its oldest. And most of the water that we take out of the Magathy aquifer is less than 100 years or so. The deepest formation, the one at the very bottom of this sequence, is called the Lloyd. It is the oldest formation of all. It's over 70 million years old, but the water that it stores is thousands of years old. So down under Long Beach Island, for example, at the bottom of the Lloyd aquifer along the South Shore, the water down there is as old as 8,000 years. All of the water that's stored in our aquifers that is freshwater begins as rainfall, and it has to first enter the glacial aquifer, and then some of that water passes down into the Magathy, and a small amount actually is able to reach the Lloyd and replenish it. So the glacial aquifer stores about 62% of all the groundwater that enters the system. The Magathy receives about 38% of all the water coming into the system, and the Lloyd only gets 3%. Back in the geologic past, Long Island was covered by ice, and this dates back to about 10,000 years ago. And when the ice melted off, it left a large debris field in a long line that stretches from the west to the east end of Long Island, and it created a formation we call moraines. And these moraines create the high points in the land elevation of Long Island and create a dividing line, an imaginary dividing line we call the groundwater divide. And between the south side of this line, we create a south shore water circulation system in the aquifer, and to the north is a northern circulation system. And we can see this on either side of the groundwater divide in this diagram. We get about 44 inches of rain each year, and half of that enters the groundwater system as recharge and replaces the water that we take out. The rain that falls right along that central line, that groundwater dividing line, is the only water that really has an opportunity to reach the Lloyd aquifer. All of the rest of the recharge remains in the other two formations. If you want to understand how an aquifer works, we can think of it as a giant bank. And just like in a bank account, you have money coming in, you have money going out, you might have some money in savings. The aquifer works exactly the same way, except we're working with water. So the water coming in is precipitation, and the water going out of the system on a constant basis includes the water we pump out for our drinking water, the water that discharges into the coastal waters, water that flows through streams, water that evaporates from the soil. All of those ways of losing water are always going on, and the water that stays behind is the water in storage that we drink as our groundwater. The key point in understanding this is that the system needs to be in balance. So the water coming in has to match the water going out. If the system becomes out of balance, then the whole groundwater regime changes in response to that, and the changes are usually changes that are detrimental, and we don't like to see those changes. So we humans are having a real impact on the groundwater itself, and we see this in two ways. One is, in parts of Long Island, we are pumping too much water out of the aquifers, and this is creating saltwater intrusion on both the north and south shore of Nassau, as well as the north and the south forks of Suffolk County. Also, we are polluting our groundwater, and we see this in water quality issues. And there are four main groups of chemicals that are causing most of our problems. First category of chemical is volatile organic compounds, VOCs. These are the chemicals that we talk about when we talk about toxic chemicals. Many of them are carcinogenic. Secondly, the second group of chemicals of concern are nitrate chemicals. These come from sewage, they come from fertilizers and other types of chemical sources. And this is a problem more extreme in Suffolk than in Nassau because Suffolk is still heavily reliant on septic systems which release their human waste back into the groundwater. Third, chemicals that are creating problems are many different types of chemical spills from industry, gasoline spills, MTBE, which is a component of gasoline, and other similar products. These create highly concentrated areas of pollution that require remediation of some type. And the last big category comes from manufacturing and commercial activities that are legacy pollutants. These are activities that happened in the past, have created very, very serious areas of contamination, and we identify these through the Superfund program. Long Island has the largest number of Superfund sites in all of New York State, over 250. These water quality problems are all a consequence of the fact that we live on the land above our groundwater supply. If we look at what goes on below ground, we see that whether it's a spill or whether it's discharges from septic systems, they behave in a similar way as this pollution gets into the groundwater. You can see the slide on the left is showing pollution streams from a septic system. And what happens is once this pollution passes down through the soil into the groundwater, it is slowly moving through our sandy aquifers. It trails out in these long streams, or what we call plumes. And they can travel for long distances, may eventually hit a well, may pass on into coastal waters. Similar responses occur for chemical spills. The material travels through the soil, and then once it gets into the ground, groundwater is dissolved and flows away from the site in the form of a plume. These pollution plumes can be very, very expensive to clean up and take decades. So that's part of our problem with groundwater. But the other aspect that we rarely consider is how are we using our water? Right now, Long Islanders use about 150 billion gallons of groundwater each year, and that number goes up in a dry year. And we also use water differently between summer and winter use. So in the winter use, our water use is reasonably conservative, but when it comes to the summer, our water use can increase anywhere from 200 to 400%. You can see this diagram here that compares water use over the course of a year, and you can see these very dramatic spikes that represent our summer water use. And one point that is really important for people to understand, when you water your lawns in the summer, especially if you're using automated irrigation systems, this overuse of water in the summer does not mean that extra water goes back into the aquifer. None of that water recharges the aquifer and takes its place again in the groundwater system. It is lost from the system forever. And so when we look at summer water use in particular, we're doing harm to the aquifer in two ways. First of all, there's very little recharge in the summer because the plants capture most of the rainfall that occurs over the growing season. And secondly, we have this very dramatic increase in pumping that is taking water from the aquifer as well. So in the summer, we are creating very major stresses that causes the groundwater system to change, especially in the summer. And as for how we use the water personally, people here on Long Island use a greater amount of water on a personal level than the national average. So on average, people around the country are using 100 gallons of water per person per day or less. Here on Long Island, we use as much as 140 gallons per person per day, and some people use far more than that. This is all water that we track through our public water supply systems, but this does not include water that's used for industry or water that's used for irrigation activities. So we're putting a major stress on our groundwater system just by the way and quantity of water that we use. The consequences of this water use practice is that we are harming areas of the aquifer system. We can see this in Nassau County, these areas in green up on the North Shore. We have the Great Neck area, the Port Washington area, the Sands Point area. These areas are all experiencing saltwater intrusion, invading all three aquifer formations. We're seeing a similar pattern down on the South Shore, under Long Beach Island and along the southwestern corner of Nassau County. So we have ongoing saltwater intrusion in both areas, and predictions are that saltwater intrusion is going to progress across the entire South Shore of Nassau County and into the areas of the northern shorelines of Nassau County as well. A similar process is going on out on the Forks in Suffolk. So that brings us to the ultimate question: how can we protect our groundwater, and what should we be doing? Who is responsible for the groundwater of Long Island? How should we manage it? How do other places address this question of water management, and how do they solve it? The good news is that many communities in New York and around the United States have actually come up with an answer to this question. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're recommending that here on Long Island, we use the same solution that most other places have already gotten to, which is to dedicate a specific agency or entity that has only one purpose, that of managing our aquifers, and we call it an Aquifer Management Compact. An agreement here in the local communities to set up an entity that does the work that needs to be done. Well, what would it do? First and foremost, it would be our groundwater champion, and it would address the kinds of issues that all other management entities do. How much water can we safely take out of the groundwater system? How do we share it fairly among all those who want to use it? How do we monitor the withdrawals? How do we develop plans to implement both protection strategies for pollution and for quantity problems? And something we clearly don't do enough of for our groundwater system is conduct many, many more scientific studies to better understand how we are changing and damaging our groundwater supply. A compact would develop tools such as computer modeling tools and use that to understand options we have for better management. It would help us clean up these many, many contaminated sites so that they don't linger and continue to affect our drinking water wells. It would combat saltwater intrusion, and it would help promote conservation of our groundwater. The most important thing it would do is it would make groundwater protection our #1 priority. Many people say that the solution is better public education, and so the compact would help create educational materials that the public would get and become more knowledgeable and sympathetic to the actions that we need to take to better protect our water. It would report annually to the public. It would alert the public when risky situations develop. And especially it would represent our water interest on Long Island within the Long Island region. Essentially, it would become the science-based manager developing policies and practices to protect our groundwater. So the bottom line is this: we only have one source of drinking water, our groundwater. We ruin it or waste it at our own peril. Thank you.
Sarah, that was really wonderful. I can't wait to discuss your talk in detail.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll be right back.
Great.
Our Long Island way of life depends on clean water for swimming, fishing, and clean fresh water to drink. But water pollution from sewage, from pesticide runoff and toxic chemicals puts it all at risk. Scientists say we can fix it. Stronger water quality standards can protect our clean water and way of life for generations to come. We all drink it. We can all protect it. Go to LongIslandCleanWaterPartnership.org.
If we're going to solve our water issues on Long Island, we'll need an informed public. Jump In print materials about water issues on Long Island can be co-branded with your organization's logo and are available at no cost to local nonprofits on Long Island and for minimal cost to local agencies and water departments. To learn more, please visit our website at liwater.org or call our office for more information. Let's spread the word about Long Island's water.
I have a grandson named Dylan who just turned 1. Of course, he's the world's most adorable boy, and I want to protect him from everything. But the world is so full of dangers. As a garden designer, I've spent my life in the environment, and now it's falling apart around us. The polar caps are melting, biodiversity is disappearing, and our water supply is threatened. What can I do? Help save polar bears by sending a donation? Sign a petition? What's that do for Dylan? I was feeling powerless until it hit me. I know something I can share with people, and if enough people get the message, we can make a massive difference at home for free. Every year, Americans put 250 million pounds of chemicals on our lawns and landscapes. These chemicals are seriously dangerous, especially to pregnant mothers, children, and pets who absorb chemicals more easily and process them less well. And to make it worse, children spend a lot of time on grass, rolling around, falling down, and sometimes even nibbling. What should be an age-old carefree joy has become a toxic minefield. Landscape chemicals can cause cancer, autism, asthma, endocrine disruption, and nervous system disorders. These are serious, often fatal consequences. And what I know is that they are totally unnecessary. Everyone can have a beautiful landscape without them. Everyone can have a landscape that's safe for their families, as well as for birds, butterflies, honeybees, hummingbirds, and protect their drinking water. The problem is most people just don't know how. They've been using chemicals for so many years that the soil is dead and the plants are addicted. If you ask, you most likely will be told that chemical-free landscaping costs more and it doesn't work anyway. But think about it. How can it cost more if you aren't buying expensive chemicals? You don't have to buy anything. The way it works is not by switching products. It's by switching the process. Chemically treated soil is dead. The health of the plants lies in living soil. Use practices that promote healthy soil, and your plants will be healthy too. It's really very easy. So, if you are told that the amounts of chemicals being applied are too small to matter, or that chemical-free doesn't work, or that it will cost more, none of this is true. If you want to fire the person who is telling you these untruths and get someone else, please don't. Help us convert them. The more people who are part of this, the better. We want everyone involved so all lawns are safe. And while you're at it, we're doing something major for the environment. In fact, this is the largest single thing we can do for the environment, right in our own yards at no additional cost. And so, for my grandson and my pets, I started the Perfect Earth Project. We're going to teach everyone how to maintain beautiful properties without chemicals. I have a promise to keep. I never want my grandson to play on a toxic lawn. Don't let your family play on one either. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and learn how to be perfect. Thank you.
The views expressed on the Soapbox are not necessarily those of Water Matters, its sponsors, hosts, guests, or underwriters. If you'd like to stand on the Water Matters Soapbox and sound off about a water issue, send your script to soapbox@liwater.org.
If you get sick, your doctor may give you medicine, and you might have some left over when you get better. So what do you do with it? Here's what. Don't ever flush drugs down the drain, because we're beginning to find them in our water here on Long Island. See, whatever goes down the drain ends up in our drinking water or in our bays and streams. So jump in and help keep Long Island's water clean. Don't flush medicines down the drain. Learn more at liwater.org.
Hello, this is Water Matters. We're back with Dr. Sarah Meyland. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think the first thing I'd like to know, after having listened to Edwina Von Gaal's PSA about organic lawns, is should we not be putting so much water on our lawns as well? What percent of Long Island's water is ending up on our lawns and then into the atmosphere?
Well, no one has really tracked the actual amount, but I would say from a percentage basis, we're probably putting about 50% or more of our groundwater on our lawns. And everything she said was exactly right. If we do what she's promoting with less chemicals and healthier lawns, they don't need to be watered.
Now, you mentioned saltwater intrusion. How much would that help combat that if we kept the water in the ground?
Oh, it would be tremendous. It would help deal with the localized problems we're seeing now, and it would help the streams maintain a healthy flow and maintain the salinity in the bays. So it's all connected. If we leave more water in the ground, the whole system stays healthier and we have less problems.
Well, you compared this to a bank, and it seems like we're severely overdrawn. How much water do we have left at our current pace before we really run into trouble with the toxic plumes and the saltwater intrusion?
Well, that is one of the questions that we need an agency like the Compact to deal with. We haven't really defined how much water we can safely take out of the system. But what we are seeing is that the longer we go without attending to the problems that we are aware of, the system continues to deteriorate. So salt water will continue to advance into our aquifers, especially with sea level rising. We know that this is going to be an ongoing problem for us from here into the future. So we need to prevent the spread of the plumes that happens when we pump too much water out, the increased saltwater intrusion, and the reality is that we don't need to take that much water out of the system, but we're not taking the actions that would prevent that from continuing to happen.
So how long have scientists known that this was an issue?
We've been talking about saltwater intrusion and pollution of the aquifer for decades, over a century. Saltwater intrusion has been the prime reason to protect the groundwater system. More recently, now that we're having the chemicals in the groundwater that we're confronting, it's the second reason why we need to do a much better job of managing the groundwater, protecting it, and keeping it as clean and as abundant as we possibly can.
Well, why hasn't this been converted into policy at any point?
Well, that's a really great question. If I could answer that well, maybe we could solve this problem. But basically, it's a question of inertia, and it's a question of changing how we've always done things. Even if they haven't worked, change is frightening to people. And the way we protect groundwater right now, which is, first of all, very badly, but secondly, the authority to protect it is very spread out. And we don't have a single entity that we could say this is where the buck stops, and really be the responsible entity to do all the things that we know we need to do. So until we really dedicate an agency to do this one job for us, we're not going to be making much headway.
Well, who's doing it right out there?
All across the United States, we see communities that set up dedicated water management agencies. So here in New York, we have a number of entities we call compacts, which are multi-state agreements, and in this case to regulate surface water and manage surface water river systems. There are systems down in Florida, for example, that are water management groundwater agencies, and they're doing a very good job of protecting the groundwater resource in Florida, for example. And we see this going on all around the United States. Even in Europe, they are dedicating agencies to manage all of the river systems across Europe. And so this is the model that works. Dedicate an entity, give it adequate funding, it has a full-time staff of people to do one thing, manage the resource properly. That's what we're missing here on Long Island.
Oh, you cited that there are 254 Superfund cleanup sites, state and federal. How do we ever get to that point?
This is really legacy pollution. The pollution entered the groundwater system many years ago, decades ago, very often. It's been down there in the system for a long time, so it's spread out over great distances. A lot of the plumes down there are multiple miles wide, a mile or so long, and some of them have gotten very deep into the system. And because it takes so long to mount remediation and then accomplish remediation, we're still living with the consequences of these past practices.
Well, let's talk about the Bethpage plume, probably the most infamous of all the plumes. What sort, I know that they're trying to remediate the situation there. If you could describe the history of that and how are we trying to tackle that one?
Okay, well, the Bethpage site was originally a military facility funded by the Navy. And over the course of the Grumman company working there, they dumped and spilled and released many different types of chemicals that over time got into the groundwater and created these very large plumes. There are multiple plumes coming off of that site. Some of the plumes have extended several miles to the south. And on top of that, we're now finding a special kind of pollution that is very dense. And rather than streaming out as a long plume through miles of groundwater, this pollution sinks through the aquifer like a rock. And it ends up getting down to the bottom of the Magathy aquifer in this case and piling up. And so there's a new project to try to delineate where that pollution is, how much it has spread, and then come up with some way to get it out, clean it up.
Well, what are they using now to try to get the VOX?
Well, most of the chemicals that are being treated now are these volatile organic chemicals. And the typical treatment is something like an air stripper, where it looks like a big smokestack is filled up with little plastic balls. There's a shower head at the top of this stack that sprays contaminated groundwater down through the stack. And at the bottom of the stack is a big fan that blows air up through the stack. So the air's blowing up as the groundwater is flowing down, and it literally blows the volatile molecule out of the water into the airstream and releases it to the atmosphere.
Well, that has its own downsides too.
Definitely
of course,
does.
Right. Perhaps we can come up with yet another way to tackle that so it doesn't go into the air.
Right.
So what really keeps you up at night? What's the your main concern?
My main concern is that we'll do nothing, or that we won't do enough. We won't take the hard steps to really say what we have now does not work, and we can't continue to do it that way. We have to do what we know is a proven approach and a proven solution to protecting our groundwater, which is to actually professionally managing it. That's going to take a lot of political will, a lot of public support, and my fear is that it still won't be enough to get beyond the gridlock of just doing what we have now, which is really hardly anything at all.
Well, let's talk about the price of water.
Okay.
It's some places on Long Island, like $1.67 per 1,000 gallons is what I've heard often. What happens? What is the cost of doing nothing then? Let's say in 10 years' time when this process continues.
Yes. The cost of continuing to do nothing is going to be that water will become much more expensive than it is now, and that some communities could completely lose their water supply. Areas like Long Beach, for example, it only has the Lloyd aquifer. If we take too much water out of the system, salt water invades the Lloyd, and Long Beach is left with no water, fresh water at all. And then they're looking at really astronomical expenses that they'll have to deal with to provide drinkable water to their citizens.
What about health issues? Edwina's PSA talks about organic lawns as a way of avoiding getting certain conditions. Doesn't all this polluted groundwater, doesn't that affect people's health in any way? Or?
Well, it certainly can if it gets into the wells and becomes part of the drinking water supply. We do have rules and regulations that require certain levels of purity in our drinking water. But, many of the chemicals that Edwina was referring to, we don't monitor for. We don't have standards for. And so it's kind of a catch-22. If we don't take this water quality and quantity problem seriously, and we don't upgrade our drinking water standards to cover all the chemicals that we're finding in the groundwater that aren't properly regulated, then it can have a very clear effect on public health over the long term.
I was reading about a dry cleaner as one of the Superfund sites, and the chemicals are right there in the ground, evaporating up. They are volatile, so that's even a concern.
Well, they can volatilize if they're in the very shallow groundwater. But once they get further and more deeply into the system, they can't evaporate out. So they become these long plumes and remain dissolved in the groundwater.
Well, I'll say this. Over the last couple of years, people have really come to recognize the gravity of the problem, and not only with groundwater, but also nitrogen, the need to sewer and on-site denitrification systems. Maybe this, after 11 studies over decades, will result in some action. I certainly hope so.
I certainly hope so as well.
Well, okay, well, that's going to do it for this edition of Water Matters. Again, my thanks to Dr. Sarah Meyland for sharing expertise with us. I hope you'll tune in again next week for another show, because here on Long Island, water matters.